Welcome back to Neon Galactic, an ongoing exploration into the nature of everything, produced by PBS affiliate Key TV in Northern California. I'm James Falk. Non-human intelligence, UAPs, spirits, and the afterlife, mysticism and science, from cutting edge to the occulted borderlands, here we're not afraid to ask questions about what it means to be conscious beings in a mystifying universe. That, to my mind, is where the fun begins. Please remember to like, subscribe, and follow this podcast and support these break glass in case of emergency conversations. The only way to raise new paradigms and encourage the critical reexamination of old and dogmatic reflexologies is to bang down the tapestried walls and rush the altar. Politely. Also, please fill out the survey linked in the description. We're expanding the mission and reach of this show and want your input into how we can add to the overall conversation without playing copycat or merely farming for eyeballs. Our guest today, Paul Levy, is an author, artist, healer, and philosopher who has plumbed the depths of reality through personal experience and traumatic initiation, becoming in the process associated with three very different realms of thought. His interest and fascination with dreams and the dreamlike nature of reality, his exploration and explication of the Wetiko, an ancient Native American concept surrounding the strangely coherent negativities that seem so prevalent in our world today, and how science and spirituality can merge and help complement one another through an understanding of quantum theory. He's someone who wrestles with what it means to be human in this modern age under contemporary pressures, while at the same time pursuing timeless truths and confronting both personal and collective aspects of shadow. In other words, he's a perfect fit for the show. It's my absolute pleasure to have him on, and we'll try to learn as much as we can from him in our limited time. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Yeah, I'm just so happy to be here with you, James. Thank you.
Yeah. So I won't be shy about it. I discovered your work through the Wetiko books, and I understand now that that's actually a phase that you're probably, an older phase for you. But I wanted to kind of get a sense of your biography for the viewers and the listeners, and I found it fascinating what I was able to, research online. Basically, it sounds like you had sort of a spiritual awakening, a kind of initiation through trauma that was diagnosed as a kind of psychiatric issue, and but that is what led you to the path that you're currently on, and opened up a lot of doors for you. Can you talk
Yeah,
about
yeah,
that a little
yeah.
bit?
And I should say the Wetiko thing is not in the past. That's something, I mean, I'm already in the middle of like my fourth book on it. So it's
Okay.
an ongoing investigation.
Yeah, and the reason
Yeah.
why I was so intrigued by it is that we're living it right now. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
hard
yeah,
to,
yeah.
yeah.
I make a joke with my friends that if I had like a really, yeah, I have a marketing department with my publisher, but if I had like a great marketing department, they couldn't do a better job of marketing and publicizing my work on Wetiko than what's happening in the world,
Yeah.
the madness, the collective madness and evil. And yeah, my background is unique, and I'm glad you're aware of that because I'm not, I don't have a PhD or, what I write about. It's nothing. I'm not certified. I'm not a therapist, anything like that. I'm not a doctor. So basically, in essence, I had this overwhelming trauma at the hands of my father. It was emotional abuse. And it happened when I was in college, when I was individuating and separating. And so, it wasn't pre-verbal. It was something that I clearly remember. And it just, the salient point is that it created enormous over-the-top suffering in me to the point where I went from being, a happy, healthy kid to not being able to live my life. And it was so overwhelmingly intense, the suffering that got initiated in me, in my mind, really, that I decided to go inwards. And we're talking, this is when I'm in my early 20s. And so I just turned my focus on my own mind and began a process of self-inquiry. For hours and hours and hours a day. It was the only thing that alleviated my suffering, even the slightest. And then when I was 24, I had a spontaneous spiritual awakening. I was sitting in meditation and got hit by a bolt of lightning, not from the sky. It ignited inside my brain. I didn't realize, I knew nothing about Kundalini, but within hours, I was in such an extreme state, an ecstatic state. I was realizing that we're having a collective dream, that this universe is nothing other than a collective dream, not metaphorically like a dream, but in a literal sense. And I was so ecstatic at what I was realizing, because it was the good news, basically,
Yeah.
that it freaked, I was with a friend. I was living in the Bay Area. He was visiting me from college, from New York. I knew him in college. And, from his point of view, I was just having a total psychotic break. And so within hours, I got brought by ambulance to, my first psychiatric hospital. And I was immediately diagnosed as being bipolar and that I was going to have this illness the rest of my life. And it was super clear to me. It couldn't have been more clear that I was having a spiritual awakening. So I just never took on the diagnoses for a moment. And over that next 18 months, maybe three, four, five other times, I was hospitalized and always diagnosed, with this chemical imbalance, bipolar, manic depression, whatever. And not for, I never bought into it at all because it was just so obvious to me that internally in my own mind that I was waking up to the
Yeah.
true nature of my own nature and of reality. And but it was brutal. It was, I could not believe the incredible insanity and abuse that the mental health system, the psych system was playing out. And that on top of the abuse from my father almost killed me and it destroyed my entire family. I haven't had a family for over 20 years because they all bought into, oh, Paul's in denial of his mental illness and all that. And the fact that he's writing books, that's part of his hallucination. And so, I'm not making this up. This
I
is,
believe you. I believe
yeah,
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Tragic.
so then the last hospitalization was 1982. And at a certain point, I understood that the hospitalizations, instead of being an error, they were part of the awakening. They were, in a way, the shamanic descent into the underworld. And but then, I was like the next over a decade, I was going to therapy and, continue, I met my teachers, these great Buddhist masters, and doing the practices they gave me to do and connecting with my dreams and making art and studying alchemy and doing psychedelics and just everything and anything under the sun that was helping to alleviate the suffering because now I had two traumas from my father and from psychiatry and and then I guess one thing that I think is important to articulate, the experience I was having a direct encounter with evil, not personal evil, archetypal evil, and through the instrument of the person of my father and then through the system of psychiatry. And then I began to realize, like iterations of a fractal, that this is the same evil that's informing what's happening in the greater body politic of our species and getting played out on the world stage. And that's when I began to realize that my encounter with evil, even though it destroyed my family and it almost killed me, was actually this revelation that something was being revealed to me. And so once I began to contemplate that, that then gave me the authority to author my books. So far, I've written three books on Wetiko, this mind virus, and and that's really having to do with the source of evil. That's what Wetiko is. It's a Native American indigenous term, but I also point out that it's a quantum phenomena in that it's a superposition of states, like encoded in the Wetiko mind virus is this incredible evil that we play out in our own mind, in relationship with each other, or collectively as a species. But encoded within it, it also contains its own, in a way, vaccine, its own medicine, and it's
Yeah.
actually helping us to wake up. And how this mind virus manifests, will it take us down or wake us up? That depends. That depends on if we recognize what it's revealing to us. So I was fortunate. I mean, people who know me now and who've known me because I've been doing this, what I, teaching for the last 30 years, they can't even imagine in their wildest dreams what I had to go through when I'm 68, when I was in my early 20s and all through my 20s and 30s. I mean, it was 24/7, just torture and torment. And I understand now, yeah, I was descending into the shamanic underworld. And, but the idea of and not that I'm any shaman, I mean, I identify as being a wounded healer.
I
Um,
love, I
and
mean,
this,
that's a powerful title that you adopt there. And Love it. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. And the shaman is the creative artist. The shaman is the storyteller, the dreamer. And but I point out in my work, and we can talk about this more, is that that archetype of the shaman, the wounded healer, that's the major archetype that's activated in the collective psyche of humanity. We're all being called to step into being, wounded healers and shamans. There's no external shaman who's going to come and heal us, is the
Okay.
point. And so, yeah, my whole background, it's not just like, oh, yes, I went to graduate school at an Ivy League and got like my PhD and all that. No, it's nothing like that. My background was all experiential. And I thought I was just going to be, because I was very academic. I thought I was going to go to graduate school, get a PhD, become a professor, and but life had other plans.
Yeah. You majored in economics and art, right? So, I mean, like that shows the kind of a mainstream path that you were on
Yeah.
up
I
until.
was in economics, and then Princeton hired me because I was such a good student to do research while I was at an undergraduate at my university, and they were paying me money, and I was on my way, right, to like, all this success in mainstream. But I was getting more and more depressed and just uninterested in that as I was connecting with art, with that, oh my God, I'm creative, and not just me, but we're all creative. That's our nature. And just one final thing about that is that in my work with this mind virus, with evil, Wetiko, whatever you call it, I continually circle around in different ways, try to point out that the medicine for the evil, for the collective madness, for the mind virus, is for us to access our creative spirit.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. First off, I mean, you mentioned it a little bit in what you were just saying, but one of the other names that you have for it is malignant egophrenia, I think is the
Right,
right term.
right,
Yeah,
right, right.
which is perfect. And I mean, basically, it's the human condition right now. I mean, basically, it's like people lost in their egoic, you know, the maze of their own minds. They're addled with materialism and with all the kind of the selfish pursuits and laden with distraction, which is where we're collectively at right now. And it seems like what you're saying is that even though Wetiko or Wendigo is an existential challenge for us, it's going to be the instrument by which we achieve transcendence ultimately, maybe. And that's the kind of the quintessential battle that we're fighting right now, and trying to figure out if we're going to graduate or
Yeah.
achieve something.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's so
exactly
powerful.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
that's exactly right. It's not, quantum physics is, proven. Yeah, this isn't, it's not deterministic, this universe. It's probabilistic. So yeah, we might, awaken if enough of us sufficiently awaken, and then we can literally step into consciously our own evolution and change the waking dream we're having. But if not enough of us do, then we're fated to destroy ourselves. And in essence, what Tico, this mind virus, you know, because I've written, like I said, 3 books, and I'm probably going to write 3 more books. I mean, it's such a profound idea. Is that what it's pointing out is that we, each one of us, have this incredible creative power. Like on the one hand, part of the spell, because it really is like our species is under a spell. And part of the spell we're under is, oh, I feel helpless, and oh, the darkness is overtaking our world and there's nothing I can do. And yet, from one point of view, I understand where people would take on that viewpoint. But the actual nature of our situation is that each one of us has incredible creative agency and power. But to the extent we're not consciously picking that up and expressing ourselves creatively, then Wetiko, which has no creative power at all, plugs into our own creativity and turns it against us. Okay. And keep in mind, this isn't some sort of like, idea I've come up with. It's in the idea of Wetiko, it's in every single spiritual wisdom traditions, in the history of our planet, and, visionary artists and thinkers. I just immediately think Philip K. Dick, the great sci-fi writer. He was completely all over Wetiko. He didn't have the name for it. He called it the Black Iron Prison. And he says this mimicking stuff is the key to everything. That's an
Yeah.
exact quote from Philip K. Dick. And Wetiko is a mime. It's a master mime. The apocryphal text calls it the counterfeiting spirit. It puts us on. In other words, it fools us into identifying with its false version of ourselves. Oh, I'm limited. I'm traumatized. And if we're not awake in that moment and we then identify with Wetiko's image of ourselves, then it has us, then it can manipulate us and control us. And if you
Yeah.
think about what I just described, here Wetiko, which ultimately it doesn't even exist, and yet it can kill us. That's the paradox. And I can say more about that. But here, Wetiko, it can't steal our soul, but it tricks us into giving our soul away. So
Yeah.
then we actually give ourselves away. We forget who we actually are, disassociate from our creative agency. That's a recipe for madness. And that's Wetiko. And if I could just say one thing, because it's such a profoundly important idea, one way of understanding when I'm saying we have this creative power, and to the extent we're not aware of it, Wetiko, through the powers that be, are more than happy to plug into our own creative agency and turn it against us. An example or a way of understanding that, just imagine being in a dream, being in a night dream, right? What is a night dream? It's a reflection of your mind. It's not separate from your mind, right? If you hold a viewpoint in the night dream it has no choice because it's nothing other than your mind. The night dream will reflect back and give you all the evidence confirming whatever your viewpoint is. So, for example, if you're in a night dream and if you're not aware of the nature of your circumstance, i.e., that you're inside of your psyche, that you're dreaming, and if you think the world you're inhabiting is objective, is separate from you, the dream has no choice but to reflect back in a way that confirms your viewpoint that the world is objective. Now you have evidence confirming even more your viewpoint. So you get entrenched in that viewpoint even
Yeah.
more. The more fixed you get in the viewpoint, the more the dream will just reflect back, that your perspective is objectively true, that the world exists objectively ad infinitum. That's a self-reinforcing feedback loop whose origin is within your own mind. What I'm describing is you've entranced yourself by your own genius for reality
Yeah.
creation. You've actually hypnotized yourself via your own creative power. That's how Wetiko works. What my work is all about is trying to shed light on that, is trying to show people how we're doing that. And then when you see, just that dynamic and you see through it, all of a sudden your creative agency that was inaccessible to you or being turned against you, because Wetiko has no creativity at all. It plugs into your creativity. That creativity then becomes available for you to express yourself, creatively and with love and compassion, because that is our nature.
Yeah. And which is what all the the religious traditions or spiritual traditions are trying to push us towards, sort of embracing that kind of inner creative divinity and recognizing that. And it sounds like Wetiko is trying to keep that from us. I do want to get into the ontological status of Wetiko. I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, and I think some people might get hung up on that. But it's kind of both and, right? I mean, it exists, but it doesn't. It's a figment of humanity, a splinter, but at the same time, it operates in a fashion that is independent in a way, right? I mean,
Yeah,
how would
yeah.
you explain
Well,
that?
yeah, no, it's such a trippy phenomena because on the one hand, if, like ultimately speaking, this mind virus does not have any existence whatsoever. So if people hear about, oh, there's a mind virus and get all afraid, no, no, no. The fear is the superfood for Wetiko. So there's nothing to be afraid of. So if we think, oh, that the mind virus is real, and we have to take precautions, well, then we've empowered it. We've given it this reality that it doesn't deserve, because ultimately it has no existence. But if we think, oh no, it doesn't exist and I don't have to deal with it, well, then it'll kill us. And an example being if there's a cholera epidemic in the next town and we say, oh, I don't have to worry, it doesn't exist, well, then we'll die of cholera. So that's the paradox. And how do we understand that? And that's why, like in quantum physics, in Tibetan Buddhism, in dreaming, they talk about, instead of just having this logic that's two-valued logic, things are either true or false. All of those, quantum physics, dreaming, Buddhism, they all have what's called four-valued logic, which is the
Yes,
logic
you
of the
mentioned this in your book.
enlightened
Yeah.
mind, where things are both true and false. And so the idea is, yeah, here Wetiko, it doesn't exist, and yet it can kill us. How is that possible? Well, when you take on four-valued logic, and like, and this is, I think of Einstein and all the great physicists, they were tapping into. This was a way of articulating and understanding the quantum realm that they had discovered in quantum physics. And so, the thing about Wetiko, it's not an ordinary phenomenon. Like, it's not just something you can objectively see going, oh, like I've had people write me going, oh, I've seen Wetiko and it's like an amoeba or a paramecium or a fish and I'm like, no, no, no. Wetiko has no form. It's formless. And that's why it's so hard to see, because it can take on, it can take over one person and they can manifest in a completely different way than another person who's taken over. So there's no commonality in a certain sense. Fundamentally there is, but I can talk more about that. But the idea is that it's this formless disease in consciousness that's actually secretly helping us to evolve. But if we don't recognize what it's revealing to us, it'll kill us. But it can take on any form, but don't confuse the form, the particular specific form, with what it looks like, because that's then to fall under its spell and to not see it.
Yeah. Which is it's a hall of mirrors to fight it, and there's almost a transcendent point through, which is, I mean, to pursue kind of the I guess what would collectively kind of be the spiritual essence of what a lot of traditions are teaching us about, you know, being in tune with, basically wrestling with ourselves and getting away from selfishness and finding love and compassion as a motivating agency or whatever. That seems to be the answer to what Wetiko is doing. The book I just read of yours was talking about George W. Bush at the time. And I'm a student of politics. I actually cover politics for the PBS station where I work. And I feel like we've been on a Wetiko whirlwind for the last 8 years or even longer, obviously. But can you talk about where you see Wetiko manifesting right now in society, and how you kind of work to define where it's operative and where it's not?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, sure. No, I so appreciate the question. And Wetiko, see, one of the ways it's so amazing. So it's a trickster. It's an inner disease of the soul, right?
Hmm.
That actually has this magical ability to somehow extend itself out into the world and configure events out in the world, and just think about that, where it's an inner disease that actually expresses itself via outer events. That's just like a dream, because a dream is, when you recognize you're dreaming, what you realize is that the external events are reflecting what's going on inside of your own psyche in a synchronistic way. And so, here Wetiko, it's rampant in the world today. What it is, it's a collective psychosis. And I point out, like, it really cracks me up. Some other authors are writing all these articles and they're quoting me as the authority, saying, oh, Paul Levy says there's a collective psychosis going on. Like they need to cite an outside authority. It's like, from my point of view, it couldn't be more obvious that there's a collective.
Exactly.
I mean, just one way of understanding that, think about what our species, we are investing the majority of our resources in creating weapons of mass destruction so that we can be more efficient in killing ourselves. If that's not a collective psychosis, then tell me what is. But it's become like this normalized thing where, like, it should be major headline in every paper around the world, but nobody's talking about it because we've gotten so accustomed to it. So on the one hand, with all, we are destroying the biosphere, the life support system of the planet, with all the endless and unnecessary wars that are happening. But then with all just the propaganda, because one of the ways that Wetiko is playing out is with all like this mind control, where it's getting harder and harder to differentiate what's true and false because of all the misinformation. So you see, the way Wetiko works, because my work is trying to shed light on it, is trying to shed light on the darkness. And Wetiko, yeah, it operates in the outside world. It's one way to think about Wetiko. It's a higher dimensional energy. It's like this transpersonal archetypal energy that can, in a literal way, possess someone and take them over for a moment or for their life, right? Or it can possess a group of people, or a nation, or a species,
Yeah.
human species. And the point is, it's impossible to see Wetiko out there when you see, say, if somebody's taken over by Wetiko and you're seeing it without, you see it's non-local, without something in you being triggered. Like, so when you see Wetiko out there, it triggers the Wetiko in you. And that's it, just like, psychologically, it's understood. You can't possibly see somebody embodying, playing out the unconscious without your unconscious being activated.
Projection, right? I mean,
Non-local. Yeah,
yeah.
it's not a separate thing. So the idea is that, yeah, to track how Wetiko is informing what's playing out in the world, but it's also then instantaneously triggering your own unconscious reactions, you know? And so that's really interesting because you just can't track it as it's playing out in the world. You have to really also track what's getting activated in your unconscious. And then when you get triggered, what most people do, they see the problem as the triggering agent outside of themselves. Oh, if only that wasn't happening, I would be back at peace. But
Yeah.
it's such an incredible opportunity when we get triggered to all of a sudden in that moment to self-reflect, to turn our attention back on, oh, what inside of us is getting activated? Because we're a species in trauma. We're all in trauma. I mean, that's what was happening for me. That was really the impetus for my whole spiritual awakening. I was in over-the-top trauma, you know, and at that point, it wasn't even really a thing. When now everybody's talking about trauma, you know, and so, yeah, I can say a lot more. I hesitate to get specific about what's happening in the world politically, because if I say, oh,
This side or that
Israel,
side or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah,
Israel is
yeah.
doing this, or the Democrats are doing this, or Zelensky is doing this, I alienate half of my
Yeah, yeah.
audience. So what
Yeah.
I say, I'll say something like, because, and then I get, or I'll get censored, or I attacked, or demonetized, or even killed. I mean, one of the things about Wetiko, when Wetiko is around, it's not safe to speak, right?
Yeah.
It censors your voice. And think about it, with all the censorship that's happening now, And so, but like, one way I've decided to say it, I'll say something like, yes, there's this evil energy that's playing out in the world. And the Democrats will be shaking their head going, oh, yes, 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 it's in the Republicans. And the Republicans are going, yes, 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 it's in the Democrats. And I get off scot-free because everybody agrees with me. But if I get specific, then I can get in trouble. And that's by design, in the sense that this system is really structured by Wetiko, and we have to figure out these novel and creative ways how to navigate it and how to be
Yeah.
skillful, where we don't just get ourselves, destroyed.
That's one of the things I appreciate about your work is that you're bringing in all these elements from a lot of different heavy thinkers historically. I mean, like what you're talking about here is like shadow projection with Jung, right? Like, I mean, the idea that we identify the flaws in others that are actually reflections of what we most
Well,
detest
if
about
I could
ourselves.
say, yeah, yeah, what you just said is so important, because shadow projection is, from the psychological point of view, that's the underlying dynamic that informs Wetiko. So maybe I could just explain, like,
Yeah,
so
please.
Jung calls shadow projection, what he describes it as is the lie, right? And who is the liar? Just symbolically, it's the devil. The idea being that encoded in shadow projection, there's something evil playing out there. So say if I'm in a dream, right? And if I'm not owning my own shadow, my own darkness, so I'm gonna, split from my darkness, dissociate from it, project it out. And what is a dream? But it's a projection of my own mind. So into the dream will walk somebody or a group of people who then carry my shadow, and they're embodying my own shadow. And it's all my own energy. I'm inside of my own psyche, but there they are, and I have all the proof that that person is evil, and they're like embodying and carrying my own projected evil. And so then what do I do? Well, when I amplify what I do, I try to destroy them. And why that is, well, when I projected the shadow in the first place, what I actually was doing was trying to exterminate my own darkness. Now it's appearing in projected form. And so when I amplify the process by trying to destroy the carrier of my own evil, because I have all the evidence, oh, there it is, they're embodying it, they're playing it out, I'm actually externalizing and playing out my own inner process of trying to destroy my own darkness. Now it's getting played out in the outer world. Okay, that's important. And of course, they're probably doing the same thing to me. And because it's typically not just one way shadow projection, it's a mutual process. And by then trying to destroy the seeming evil out there that the other person is embodying, well, guess what? I am now possessed by the very evil I'm trying to destroy. See, that's the way Wetiko works. And all the while I'm doing it, identified with the light, and I'm on the side of good,
Yeah,
and
righteously
you know,
indignant, right? I mean,
yeah,
you're like,
righteously indignant. It's completely insane. And that's really the driver for understanding, psychologically speaking, that's the mechanism that underlies. I mean, think about the incredible shadow projection that's playing out, just pick the person, whether it's Putin or Trump or Biden or Hillary Clinton or, whatever, or the Israelis or the Zionists or the Palestinians, or and certain, as soon as we project the shadow, then we've offered ourselves into the hands of Wetiko.
is there ever going to be a human species without Wetiko's influence?
Yeah, well, I've imagined, I wrote these emails to a rabbi friend of mine a few years ago where I was contemplating this, and I could easily, imagine that there would be this world where we have so woken up as a species, not with like the woke thing that's happening, which is a form
Yeah,
of Wetiko, but truly awakened. You see, the essence of Wetiko, the real fundamental part of it, it's a form of blindness, but it's a form of blindness that doesn't know it's blind, that thinks it's sighted, that thinks it's more sighted than people who actually are awake and see. But it's a form of blindness that actually identifies as a separate self. So if I think I'm a separate self, that immediately makes you an other. If you're an other, then I feel fear. Fear is the superfood for Wetiko, right? So if I see through that imagination, the illusion of existing in a way that I don't as a separate self, and I recognize the truth of my situation, I realize, wait a second, I'm interconnected with you and everyone else and the whole universe and all species. We actually depend on each other for our own well-being. That's the step out of the separate self. That's what every wisdom tradition is pointing at. And I can easily imagine when sufficient numbers of us do that, we can find ourselves and create the world in a way that reflects back that realization, and that we treat each other with love and kindness and compassion, with the understanding that we're all not separate. So I can totally go there.
well, I mean, you call it the me disease, again, with the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
egophrenia, and that's exactly what you're talking about. It's like we're all under the illusion that we're separate, and then that separate, we're trying to protect ourselves and claim things, and we're fighting these battles that, like you're saying, ontologically are unnecessary. But I do want to get at what your ontology is behind it. I mean, what is your conception, or what have you come to realize about the nature of things that underlies human existence and existence more broadly?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what I've realized in essence, to put it really simply, is that we are having right now a dream. And just like in our night dream, we can recognize the nature of our situation and have lucidity or not. And then think, while being in the dream, that it's real and separate and solid and objective, and then react to it and then become conditioned by it and become programmed by it, or we can simply just see things as they are, including ourselves, and recognize the nature of our circumstance. And that's not just like some new age theory. That's what quantum physics is showing us. And, that's why I have this new book coming out, an expanded, edition of my quantum physics book, where I'm not a physicist, but and the typically the corporate academically trained physicists, they're not prepared. You see, quantum physics, I don't know anybody who doesn't agree with it's the greatest discovery ever in all of history. That there's
Yeah.
no doubt about in the realm of science.
And we've
You
never
know,
really come to terms with it. I mean, like,
yeah,
I
no, we're
think,
at the beginning stages.
yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
of
Yeah.
coming to terms with it. But where the controversy is, well, what does it mean? It's so radical. You know, it was discovered over a century ago, and we're at the very beginning stages of trying to like integrate and understand what it's showing us. And the quantum physicists are openly saying, yeah, we haven't really connected with the core, the main, the central idea. It's like they use the image of like being in a forest and they come across this automobile and they've never seen an automobile. They have no idea what its function is. And they turn on the turning signals or the lights or the radio or the heater, but they haven't figured out what it's really about. The same thing with quantum physics. The founding fathers are saying, yeah, we haven't found this central idea. And they were of the opinion that when we find it, it'll be so simple, we'll be able to express it on a bumper sticker, you know? And I feel I'm not a physicist at all, but I feel like no, when I had my spiritual awakening, I had a quantum shift and I was living in a universe that simulated the universe I had grown up in that looked exactly the same, except it couldn't be more different, particularly because stuff that I thought of that was impossible was happening on a regular basis. And then I found quantum physics and I realized, oh my God, they're describing the universe that I found myself in. And so, the quantum physicists were also saying when we tune into the central idea and really get what quantum physics is revealing to us, and what it's revealing to us is that we're having a collective dream, the physicists would say, we will then say to ourselves, how could we have been so blind? How could we have been so stupid? These are actual quotes, and here I am, don't have any training in physics whatsoever. And then I'm just saying, look, it's showing us that we're having a collective dream. And the implications are beyond enormous. Because if I could just give a little thumbnail sketch of
Please.
what quantum physics is actually showing us. So before quantum
Yeah.
physics came, on the scene, physicists were conceiving of the world as being objective, separate from them. And they were just studying this external world, trying to understand it. Then along comes quantum physics that empirically proved beyond the slightest shadow of a doubt that there is no objective world, there's no objective anything, that the idea of an objective world is simply that. It's just an idea in our head with no correlate to reality. And to be more precise, they discovered that the act of observing this universe actually influences the universe that we're observing. That's a description of a dream. Okay. What that means is that the act of observation is creative, that our perception of the universe is a key factor in the equation of the creation of the universe. Okay. We're not just passively observing, but we're actively co-creating in the way we observe, in the way we interpret this waking ink blot, in the way we have this meaning we place on it, that actually has an effect on our experience, that we are literally creating our experience. No one else is doing that. Whatever's happening in our life is happening. But we are, by the way we interpret what's happening and the meaning we place on it, we are actually creating our experience of ourselves and our experience of the world. That's what quantum physics is showing us, that we have this previously unimaginable creative agency, each one of us. And where Wetiko, the mind virus, comes in is to the extent that any of us are not consciously aware and expressing ourselves creatively, then this mind virus that doesn't even exist, except for that it can kill us if we don't come to terms with it, will then plug into our own creativity and turn it against us. And so many people I work with, because I have a whole, private practice, pretty much everyone is like, oh, I have all these creative ideas, I have these visions, but I feel stuck, I'm blocked, I have resistance. And I'm always interested, like, slow it down. What is your experience right at the moment when you're wanting to be creative? And I mean, I've learned in myself, I go through, because I'm a creative person,
Yeah.
that's the main thing in my life. And every day when I sit down to write in the morning, when I write my books, I feel this incredible resistance and almost like these demons that are wanting to stop me. And I've learned that's the best news ever. That's showing I'm on the right path, because that's Wetiko. Its job is to actually make sure we don't connect with our nature. And if you just see it in that way, oh, then it's too painful. I feel blocked. I can't get over my edge. But the point is, is that they wouldn't be, the Wetiko forces wouldn't be so invested in keeping you from your nature if your nature, it makes them unemployed. When
Yeah.
you connect with our true nature, with our light, with the creative spirit, then Wetiko has no power whatsoever. And that's why in the Quran, the holy book of Islam, in all throughout the book, they talk about Wetiko. I'm familiar, like for example, I think it's the surah, the last of the verses. It gives the warning to humanity, and the warning is about Wetiko, and it calls it the slinking prompter,
Hmm.
and prompter because it prompts us to react, to act out unconsciously, to potentially act out evil. But
Yeah.
it's slinking because when you actually see it, because it only operates to the point that we don't look. When we turn away, we turn a blind eye, that is Wetiko. Then it becomes empowered. But when we see Wetiko, it's feeble. It has no power at all, and it slinks away. That's why they call it the slinking prompter.
Yeah. But its manifestations can be so subtle. I mean, that's like it's like when you think you're fighting it, you're actually empowering it. I mean, it's like
Yeah,
really
yeah, yeah,
it makes
totally.
for
If you're fighting evil, you've already lost. You're playing evil,
yeah. If you're
you know.
fighting, I mean, that's the thing. And then but then like I mean, it sounds enormously complex, but then the solution is ultimately also very simple. Um, what is the solution to Wetiko? I mean, how would
Yeah,
you
yeah,
define
yeah.
that?
Yeah. One way to think about it, think about like this multifaceted jewel, right? And there are all these facets. So on one hand, to the extent we connect with our true nature, you know, and like, what is our true nature? That's such a cliche, right? Well, our true nature by its very nature is creative. So when you have realization of your nature, you embody and express yourself creatively. And the more you do that, the deepen your realization of your nature in a positive feedback loop. So on the one hand, because we are creative beings made in the image of our creator. And you know, and some people say to me, for example, oh, I'm not creative at all.
Yeah,
And
that's what I was going to say. If someone's not hears that and says, "Well, I'm not an artist. What do I do?" That's
yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
what you mean.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would say to them, I would say, wow, you're so creative that your divine creativity has created for you the experience of how incredibly not creative you are. That's your divine creativity in action, you know?
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, one of the medicines or the solutions, is to really connect with being creative. And I'm not just talking about painting or drawing or, yeah, that's being creative, but that's a flatland version. We are creative every moment of our lives, the way we walk, if I wash dishes, the way, whatever, everything, every moment is creative. So on the one hand, there's that. Then there's, by tapping into our nature, the expression of that is compassion, is love and compassion because you've stepped out of the separate self. You have the recognition we're all dream characters in each other's dream. We're all interconnected, and the expression of that is compassion, is love. Then another way of describing, and all of these are the same, just different articulations of this, say that multifaceted jewel. The cure for Wetiko is to see in physics, they talk about the non-local field in which we're all contained and of which we're all expressions of. And Einstein says the field is the only reality. And yeah, to see that's to tune into the quantum. And the quantum is equivalent to like in Buddhism, when the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, when he had the realization of Buddha nature, of the true nature, of our Christ nature, whatever you call it, that is the quantum. And so, that's to tune into the non-local field or to see the dreamlike nature, to realize we are dreaming. We have this, it's what I call the sacred power of dreaming. That's the part of us that's dreaming this universe up into materialization each and every moment, but we're doing it unconsciously. And like one way of understanding that is through the imagination. So imagine, you're in a dream, you're in a night dream, and imagine, your dream ego, has lucidity and you realize, oh, wow, I've woken up. I'm realizing the nature of my circumstance. I'm dreaming. I'm inside of my psyche. And then imagine some of the other dream characters who are just embodied reflective aspects of yourself. then imagine that they also are becoming lucid. And then imagine that you all come together and hang out and contemplate what you're realizing. Oh my God, we're inhabiting this shared collective dream, and this dream is manifesting in the way it is, kind of like in a nightmarish way, because we've all been programmed and conditioned to dream it that way.
Yeah.
And that being said, we can dream it different. We can actually get in phase with each other and dream a dream that's much more in alignment with who we're discovering ourselves to be as interconnected beings who are parts of a greater organism and not separate. Now, that's a description of a night dream. That's our situation in our waking dream.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what, and the same way, when, because this realization has to come through the individual. It's not just, oh, a collective thing that we can implement a new law to do this. But when any one person has realization, it immediately impacts the collective, unconscious. And it makes it's almost like that pathway has gotten cleared, making it more easy for other people to have the realization too.
Yeah.
And then as we more and more connect with other people who are also awakening, we discover, oh my God, this is like contagious. This can go viral when we creatively express it and embody it in a congruent way.
Yeah.
And this is why the profound importance of being creative, of art, that it's the artists who are going to save our world, that then this can go viral in the same way that, like in a negative way, that the alleged COVID virus went viral.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that it's like there's a critical threshold where, and perhaps if enough people get awakened, then the awakening process can sort of run away and maybe get to that place where we are existing in a place where there's, the Wetiko virus is in remission or whatever, a much more enlightened kind of time. I have close friends who we talk about that, whether if there are enough people who have a spiritual awakening, at some point, does that have a manifestation in the broader body, that where
Yeah,
everyone
yeah.
suddenly finds it
Well,
much
yeah,
easier to wake up or is just, yeah,
yeah, yeah, but that's really true. For years now, 40 plus years, I've been really deeply studying, the work of Jung. And more, I'm realizing that well, first off, he was totally switched on to Wetiko. He just didn't have the name. One
yeah,
name he called it, what was it? Was totalitarian psychosis. And I can say a bit more about that. But he was switched on to when any one person, has realization, or even, for example, because he was a psychiatrist in therapy, he would say, yeah, even, you're helping one person as a therapist, but he says that might be this is a famous quote, the make weight that tips the scales in all of humanity, right? So if you're helping one person to, like, see their shadow, to recognize the dreamlike nature, to connect with their true nature, however you say it, that might be the make weight that tips the scales. And he would use an example. He said, if you had a glass of water and dissolve grains of sugar in that water, they just dissolve and dissolve and dissolve till they reach the saturation point. And then you add one more grain of sugar, and then a crystal will manifest. And he says, this is the way that symbols manifest in the collective unconscious. And any one of us, I would add, who has realization, who sees Wetiko, who sees their shadow, who recognizes the dreamlike nature, any one of us doing that, even in this moment, might be that grain of sugar that catalyzes an awakening in the collective unconscious of our species.
which makes each of our own journey that much more important, and each of us sharing what we can of our journey and hopefully bringing other people along with us that much more important. I mean, so
Right.
the empathy part is accentuated by virtue of that, like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
mechanism. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
just,
And if I could then add too, you see, this is so profound because what I'm describing, I mean, this is the diagnosis of the malady that our species has fallen into, the Wetiko
I
idea.
agree. I totally
And
agree.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no question when you really study it. And and then I think of Jung, who says, in times of collective psychosis, and this is a quote, only a new symbolic idea will save us. And that's exactly what Wetiko is. It's a new symbolic idea. It's a saving idea. And ideas aren't these like passive things. No, they're the lens through which we actually see and perceive and create our universe. Now, to add to this, see, in quantum physics, I point out, so quantum physics is offering us the medicine for Wetiko because it's showing us there's nothing objective. And see, as soon as we see the world as objective, there's something else that's happening. We then are conjuring ourselves up as being a subject, as that exists in three-dimensional space and time, i.e., a separate self. So if we see the world objectively, we're reciprocally co-arising with our perception of the world existing objectively. We then conceive of ourselves as being a subject, and then it's a self-reinforcing feedback loop, right?
Yeah.
That's the illusion. That's the illusion that I'm trying to help people to see through. Quantum physics has dispelled the idea of there being an objective universe. And by doing that, it's promoted itself to become a spiritual path. Because if there's nothing objective, you see, in a quantum universe, and even though quantum physics was trying to understand the microstructure, what is the building blocks of this world, and as it went down and down in scale, it discovered not matter, but consciousness. There was nothing fundamentally having to do anything with physical matter, but more of mind. And quantum physics basically is saying, yeah, this whole universe, not just on the micro scale, but on the macro scale and everywhere in between, is quantum through and through. And a quantum universe, there's no separate things interacting. There's no things at all. It's one undivided, seamlessly interconnected quantum field, and that we are a part of it. We're an expression of that, okay? So quantum physics, and I go into this in my new book, is offering us the medicine for Wetiko, because Wetiko, then we get fixed in our viewpoint. We then solidify the world or each other in a certain way, and being a dream, then we have all the evidence, confirming the seeming truth of our viewpoint, and we've entranced ourselves. And what I'm pointing out is that quantum physics is a revelation that we have dreamed up into the world to help us to dispel our own madness. And in Tibetan Buddhism, there's this incredible tradition called the hidden treasure tradition, and in the Tibetan word, terma, the terma tradition. And the idea is, and the lineage I do practice for 40 years, it's inspired by the terma tradition. So the idea is if the community of practitioners becomes a little bit stale or one-sided, all of a sudden a terma, a hidden treasure, will be discovered that will bring all the practitioners back into balance. And it's very much just like if I, as a person, am one-sided and asleep in a certain way, my unconscious, which compensates my one-sidedness, will send me a dream, and it'll be a symbol. And if I get into alignment with the symbol, I'll get back to being connected to myself. That's a way of understanding terma. It's like these alarm clocks that are hidden in the fabric of the waking dream, they're like keys that unlock locks. They're like charms that break spells. And this terma thing, it's not just a fairy tale. Incredible scholars the world over are studying the terma tradition. And it's not just Tibetan Buddhism. Every spiritual tradition has the idea that there are certain hidden spiritual treasures hidden within the multidimensional fabric of the universe, including our minds, that at the right moment, they'll be discovered. I mean, think about somebody who all of a sudden a song falls in their head.
Yeah.
And I
Well, I
would
mean,
ask, from where? From where?
Nag Hammadi or the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean,
Right. Exactly.
1947. I mean, all the flying saucers that were spotted. I mean, I'm a one who thinks. I think a lot about the UFO phenomenon, and I think a lot of that is the either the universe or our collective unconscious, or I mean, urging us to reaccept or reanalyze what the nature of reality is and come to a different conclusion. And I think that those might be function as like what you're saying as
Yeah,
term as
no,
keys to get us to, yeah,
exactly. So I've expanded the I don't want to appropriate the Tibetan idea of
sure, yeah, yeah,
you know, but I point out that quantum physics can be seen as being a modern day analog to a terma, that we as a species have dreamed up quantum physics into our world and into our minds as a way of helping us to awaken, that it's a revelation, it's a known thing. It's an archetypal process that in times of darkness, that's when revelations happen, and so we should keep our eyes open for it. And I'm pointing out that the revelation that is quantum physics is helping us to see the dreamlike nature. It's helping us to dispel Wetiko. And the only thing that's needed is for us to recognize what's being revealed. And if we don't recognize what's being revealed, then guaranteed we're fated to continue to destroy ourselves.
Yeah, because I don't know that we could realize or even conceptualize another choice. I mean, that's just the way that we live. And in fact, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that too. You know, proudly and it's all in the headlines. We're in the process of creating our own sort of synthetic God through AI. And I don't want to be like the reflexive basher of AI out of fear sake. But I worry about AI and I worry about what it could mean, but it could function in a way that could help us wake up. I mean, if it is a smart enough machine that once fed all the information spits back out that we really need to reckon with quantum physics, or we really need to understand better the nature of things and have that affect how we plan our societies and live our lives, that would be useful. But I'm worried that it's kind of like the AIs that they trained on the data sets of the internet. You know, it'll start spouting racist dogma and,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because it's trained on what we're doing, not what we could be doing. But what are your thoughts on AI? How does that reflect on all this, and where do you come down on it?
Yeah, no. Well, one of the things that happens with Wetiko is that when somebody gets taken over by Wetiko, and we all get taken over by it. It's we if somebody says, "Oh no, I'm free of Wetiko," I run the other way because that person is dangerous. It's like who hasn't fallen into their unconscious and acted out their unconscious? We all have, you
Yeah,
know, and but when somebody gets taken over by Wetiko, and it really, that's the right term, taken over or possessed, because it's a higher dimensional energy that, it impersonates us. That's the counterfeiting spirit. Remember I was saying it's a mind, it's a master mind.
yeah,
And and then if we then fall for its ruse and then unwittingly become an instrument through which Wetiko is acting itself out in the world, we become like an automaton. We become like a robot with no creativity programmed in.
yeah,
And in a sense, we become propagandized and um, just repeat the algorithm. We're totally brainwashed and mind controlled, all the while thinking we're in possession of the truth. And meanwhile, something other than ourselves that might not even be human is actually we become the outpost and the conduit for that energy to incarnate itself into our world. And so
yeah,
what I'm describing is how AI, is the shadow side of AI. And there are people I know who are, kind of connecting AI with, extraterrestrial, negative ETs, and it's very, very scary. I'm very much studying the shadow side of AI, which is very, very real. And it's something there never before in the history of our species. We've had war and poverty and wealth inequality and all this stuff, but we've never had anything like AI. But it also reminds me, like in my quantum physics book, I bring up the that the powers that be really don't want the gnosis of quantum physics to get out to the public because it's so empowering. So in a way, it's like this secret, it's like a guild secret where only the initiates or have access to the wisdom, to the empowerment that quantum physics is openly like bestowing on all of us. The point is that it can be implemented for good or evil, depending on who's in charge. And then I think of Einstein. He was one of the founding fathers of quantum physics, but he couldn't embrace it. It was so radical. You see, it's such a radical discovery. It's like the floor got pulled out from under the physicists. The universe they thought they were living in, they realized didn't even exist.
yeah. I mean,
In a
half of the
way,
founders ended up being mystics themselves. I mean,
right, right.
which I think is fascinating. I mean,
Yeah,
for people who try to hang on to materialist interpretations
yeah,
of,
yeah, yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, yeah. So Einstein actually said, he goes, because it's so easy to think, oh, quantum physics, it's very esoteric, it's very complicated, it's very abstract, mathematical, I don't understand it. And what Einstein said, he goes, quantum physics is so uncommonly important, it should be everyone's concern. Okay, so quantum physics, I think the biggest chapter in my quantum physics book is about the everyday world of quantum physics, about we all experience the quantum, each and every moment, but we don't have the name for it. We don't have the understanding of it. But when we do, then we can access it and express it consciously in a way that's actually going to serve us. And so, yeah, it's just like for example, quantum physics has changed the entire history of our planet with all the new technologies from, like with nuclear, energy and lasers and transistors and computing and on and on and on, right? But the people who study this say, oh, that's just the low-hanging fruit. That's nothing compared to when we realize what quantum physics is revealing to us, because the greatest gift it's going to give us is going to change the way we think. It's gonna change our thinking and the way we conceive of ourselves and the way we conceive of the universe and the way we conceive of who we are in relation to the universe. And it's going to change the nature, it's going to change our minds. And that's the real gift that quantum physics is giving us. And this isn't just me in my opinion. I've studied this stuff. This is what the real cutting edge founding fathers of quantum physics were saying. Like, for example, there's a quantum physicist current day, Christopher Fuchs, who's an amazing thinker. And he says quantum physics makes life worth living, and that's a quote. And then there's another quantum physicist who says, yeah, when I get depressed, I have two go-tos. I put on classical music like of Mozart, or I study quantum physics. That cures my depression because it's so incredibly inspiring and it's being freely offered to us. And that's why I'm like trying to translate it because I'm not a physicist. I'm in my book, I'm just trying to transmit it in a way that, for the layperson, because we all have an intuitive sense that there's something in us that's amazing. And the quantum physicists are also saying, here are the hardest, rigorous scientists on the planet. And again and again, what are they saying? They're saying, oh my God, this world is filled with magic.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. What's interesting too is that like a lot of the scientists on the cutting edge who are out there the furthest are becoming increasingly idealistic in their conception of what the world is, and I think that quantum physics is pushing them in that direction. I had the philosopher Bernardo Kastrup on the show, and he was talking
Oh, I
about
love
his
his work. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
he's fantastic. And he was talking exactly about his approach to ontology. And basically, it emerges out of quantum physics. And what I appreciate what you're doing, that I think that, I mean, I've long noticed that we haven't really come to terms with what quantum physics means in terms of our conceptions on a day-to-day basis of what reality is. And that's kind of what you're pointing at. And you're giving permission for folks who aren't degreed physicists to have these discussions. And I think that that's important because it's a fact of life, whether or not we can break it down into equations or not. It's a reality that is that has been verified a thousandfold, and so we need to start to figure out what that can mean for the rest of us and our societies and our own self-conception as a species.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so
And
I
if I could
appreciate
just
that.
add, no, totally. And I love Kastrup's work. I mean, he's very tuned in to the same stuff that I am. And I just think he's amazing. Um, and just to sort of put things in context, I mean, just to trip out that when the Wetiko mind virus came into my family, through the instrument of my father, the story isn't important. But then I began to realize the whole family system and then psychiatry, they all protected the abuser, my father. And that's when I began to realize, wow, there's like a non-local field that I'm like interfacing with that I didn't understand. And then, like I said, I was hospitalized, diagnosed, that was over 40 years ago, and all that. And but when my parents died, the rest of my family, I haven't, it's been over 20 years. I haven't had any contact with my family. They all think, oh, we have this mentally ill relative in Portland, Oregon, who's just in denial of his mental illness. And so, I'm just sharing that because it's sort of, the tragic aspect. And I've just had to live with that. But why I bring that up, I think so many people who are tapping into the quantum, who are seeing the dreamlike nature, are having these shamanic initiatory processes where they're beginning
Yeah,
to wake up. And then if they get into the clutches of psychiatry, they'll get pathologized and diagnosed and put in a back ward. And it can be tragic. They can spend the rest of their lives just taking on, the diagnosis, identifying with, oh, I'm bipolar, I'm mentally ill, I'm schizophrenic, I'm this, I'm that. And it's tragic, and it's fortunate. I mean, for me now, I have psychiatrists, I have Jungian analysts who study with me, who are clients of mine, who pay me money to talk with me. So it's been, a real turnaround. But I'm just bringing up, I just got overwhelmed with the sadness, the feeling of sadness of there are so many people who are awakening, because like I was saying before, it might be a good time for me to just elucidate this a little bit. The number one, in my opinion, archetype that's activated in the collective unconscious is the archetype of the shaman, you
yeah,
know? The shaman is the wounded healer, it is the creative artist, it's the dreamer, the storyteller. And and what does a shaman do? They're so empathic, they take on the illness of the client or the community. And take on means they take it within themselves and fall ill. It also means they have it out with that demon. So they take
yeah,
on, in a sense, the darkness, the demon, the illness, and they fall ill. But if they stay ill, then they can't be of help for anyone. Then they need a shaman. But the idea is they're able, because of their connection to the self, to find their way back to their inner light, to their inner wholeness, and to metabolize that illness. And by them doing that energetically, non-locally, that creates the pathway that makes it easier for the client or the community to do the same thing. And in a sense, we've all been made crazy by
yeah,
the insanity that's playing out in the world that we're all dreaming up. It's reflecting our own insanity. And to the extent that any of us find our way back to our center, to ourself, to our nature, to our love, to our compassion, to our creativity, then we are actually being shamans for the planet. And I remember I used to hang out with this one Western shaman, Harner, Michael Harner, because he used to be a professor in New York, and I used to work close to where he taught. And so I would just go and hang out with him and pick his brains. And he would tell me, he goes, yeah, there are two dangers of shamanism. And one is, say somebody drinks ayahuasca or does mushrooms, one time, and they have an experience, and then they put a shingle, oh, I'm a shaman, and they have no idea what they're doing, and they can do damage for other people or for themselves. And we
yeah,
see that a lot with the psychedelic renaissance that's happening. But the other danger was way more interesting to me. It was like the incredible danger is for us to stay unconscious of our shamanic gifts, because we all have these shamanic gifts. And if we split off from them, because a shaman, you would have to be completely insane to consciously choose to be a shaman, because the suffering is so overwhelming you can't even imagine. But it's something that typically it's conceived of as being called. You're called by the spirits. And then when you're called, if you say, no, no, I'm not good enough, it's inconvenient, I'm not smart enough, or whatever, that's when the would-be shaman gets sick. But if you assent to the calling, that's when all of a sudden you get supported in your quest. And part of the calling of a shaman is you descend into the darkness of the unconscious. Like the chapter on shamanism in my book, in the third Wetiko book, I finished literally weeks before the lockdown. And I was talking about, oh, we as a species, we're going through a shamanic descent into the darkness of the unconscious. And, little
and
did I know.
I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and we were coming to the end of the interview, but it's really, I wanted to mention this. My wife and I both had a spiritual awakening during COVID. We were in lockdown. We both got sick. We both had taken the jab. I mean, and that's a whole another issue, and all of that is
Right.
political and whatnot. But I don't know if it was the isolation. I don't know if it was the illness. I don't know what it was, but we both came out of that feeling like we had died and woke up in a whole different universe.
Right. Right.
And it was really really profound, and we're still wrestling with what the implications of are of that for us now. Like we are on a whole
Right.
different journey and trajectory than we were beforehand, And that moment was the transformational moment. So it's true what you're saying for us, especially, and maybe for lots of other folks. But we descended and came out, and it's a whole different
Yeah, because the
place, you know?
archetype of the shaman, basically, it's very simple. The shaman gets called. If they ascend to the calling, they descend into the underworld, the place of, demons and evil and madness and death. And it's very dangerous because you can stay stuck there. But if the
Yeah.
shaman is able to come back into our world, they are bearing gifts, and the gifts are creativity and a spiritual understanding. And that's what it feels like with you and your wife. You're in the process of really
Yeah.
integrating that. And that's a way of understanding, like, the way I can describe what happened with me and my father was that I had a direct encounter with evil, and it destroyed my family. It almost killed me. And yet, more and more, I realized, oh, wow, I had unwittingly gotten enlisted into a shamanic initiatory process. And over the years of intense suffering, I've been able to like transmute this evil into something helpful, into medicine that's informed my work.
Helped you to help people, which is
And that's the wounded healer. The wounded healer is somebody who suffers an incurable wound. Like for years, because I feel my wound all the time, 24/7. And for years, I'm like, I got to get rid of this. I got to heal this and cure this. And then I began to realize, what if it never goes away? And then I realized it was a portal through which I can access my creative gifts. That's the archetype of the wounded healer, that they're so familiar with their own wounding that when they meet other people who are wounded, instead of just reactively trying to fix them or give them advice, they're able to be present with that other person in their wounding because they're so comfortable with their own wounding. And that itself is like right there, that's 50% of the healing.
all right, Paul. That was a fantastic conversation. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just so appreciate having someone like you to just trip out with about what's going on in our world. So thank you.